We're going on assignment with the Voice of America.
How has it been like covering that event?
And I have a list right here in front of me of all the journalists who were beaten.
I make the call because I'm on the ground.
The Chechen.
Gabe Joslow, VOA News, Mogadishu.
Hello again, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. I'm Imran Siddiqui.
And I'm Alex Villarreal. Just ahead, we take an in-depth look at Rwanda, 20 years after the genocide that tore the country apart.
We'll talk with VOA's East Africa correspondent and our reporters in Washington about the tragedy and how it's still affecting life today.
We'll also hear about a struggle for justice in India where gang rapes continue to threaten women.
This and more coming your way in the next half hour as we go on assignment.
This month marks 2 decades since Rwanda's 1994 genocide. The 100-day rampage saw ethnic Hutu militias kill 800,000 people, most of them Tutsis, but some moderate Hutus.
On April 7th, the 20th anniversary of the day the violence broke out, Rwandans came together for a ceremony to reflect on the atrocities.
VOA East Africa correspondent Gabe Joslow was in Rwanda for the anniversary, and he talked with me about what he saw. Let's go ahead and start with a clip of his report on the commemoration.
Cries and wails erupted in the crowd throughout the ceremony as some became overwhelmed with emotion. African heads of state and foreign dignitaries gathered for the memorial, but a French delegation was notably absent, having withdrawn in protest over Mr. Kagame's recent remarks accusing France of involvement in the genocide.
This image of this woman wailing in response at the commemoration event, how does that reflect the mood currently in Rwanda about this piece of the country's history?
Yeah, I think the genocide, rightfully so, has caused a lot of trauma in the country. I mean, it was a devastating event that killed more than 800,000 people and divided the country and really, just tore the place apart. So there's a lot of, just lingering wounds and emotion left over from that time. So what we saw at the commemoration event, as a victim was telling his testimony and recounting what happened to him 20 years ago, a lot of people in the crowd just sort of lost it. You heard these wails go up and people were crying and really becoming so overwhelmed with emotion they had to be carried out of the stadium.
So are there still strong ethnic divisions?
It's a hard question to answer because for a long time it wasn't something that people really wanted to talk about. This was such an ugly and dark chapter in Rwanda's history that it seemed the policy for many years was to not discuss ethnicity, like we were just going to get rid of these tribal and ethnic divisions. No more Hutus, no more Tutsis. In the last few years or so, we've seen some initiatives, though, that more directly take on the issue in a public way.
Many of these young people in Rwanda weren't alive when it happened. They're finding out about it. So what's their take on the genocide and on these efforts to recover from it?
Despite the fact that a lot of them weren't old enough or weren't even born at a time when the genocide was taking place to really have experienced it or experienced it directly, a lot of them feel a very strong connection. This was like a very significant part of the country's recent history, and a lot of them did have family members or have heard family stories about survival during that time. So there's a very strong desire among a lot of the young people I spoke to connect to what happened.
Another aspect of your reporting, Gabe, was this bitterness that's felt among Rwandans against the international community. What's the basis of that?
Well, there was a lot of attention paid at this commemoration to some of the failures of the United Nations peacekeeping force that was in Rwanda at the time to act to stop the genocide, despite the fact that they had some warnings that something of that scale could take place. And that Hutu militias were being armed. And so what we saw is the United Nations Secretary General actually issued something of an apology for the UN's action, saying that they could have and should have done more.
Rwanda tends to be defined by this event. So having been there, if you were to talk to someone and they were to ask you, what's Rwanda like? What would you tell them? How would you describe it?
The development there is just amazing, and the ease of getting around and doing business, and just basically just the ease of life there, and how orderly and how secure and how safe it is like no other place in the region, as far as I can tell. So working there was actually pretty easy. At the same time, though, because of some concerns about people are a little afraid to express themselves. There's a little bit, the government is a bit overbearing. There's some controls on the media and controls on civil society. So it's not a place that embraces free speech the way somewhere like Nairobi, where I am now, does. So in Nairobi, everybody has an opinion and they're very willing to share it. Whereas in Rwanda, it's a little bit difficult to get people to open up. And I don't think the amount of time I spent there was quite enough to really connect with people and get, behind or underneath the surface of what you see with these clean streets and this high-tech, this city that has developed quite rapidly.
And that was Gabe Joslow, VOA East Africa correspondent based in Kenya. Thank you so much, Gabe.
All right, we're taking a break now. When we come back, a look at survivors of the Rwandan genocide now living in the United States. You're watching On Assignment.
Here in Washington, survivors of Rwanda's 1994 genocide joined U.S. and Rwandan officials to remember lost loved ones and look ahead to the future of their homeland. VOA's Mariama Diallo reported on the observance and joins me right now for more. Thank you so much for joining me, Mariama.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. Tell us a little bit about this memorial event that you covered and the people that you met there.
Well, it was a very interesting event. As a journalist, I always think I go to these events, I cover them, get out, write my story. But on this one in particular, it was just sad. It was the first time I think I've been in the same room with so many Rwandan people, and every single person had a story. It's not everyone that I spoke to, but even the people that I didn't speak to, when you look at their faces, you can tell that they've gone through hell and back.
One of the guests that you spoke to, an interesting guest, 9 years old. When this happened, she was 9 years old, right? When she lost her family. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, her name is Jacqueline Murekatete, and a beautiful young lady who actually basically lost all her siblings, 6 of her siblings, her parents, also lost an extended family. She was 9 years old when the Rwandan genocide was taking place. And it was just amazing to listen to her story and hear what she had to say on basically what was happening during that time. At 9 years old, young, but she still remembers the cries from kids who had lost their parents, women who were being dragged to their death. Listening to the radio when she would listen to broadcasters, for example, encourage this genocide, basically telling the Hutu population, go and kill these Tutsis because they are considered as cockroaches and we have to exterminate them. At 9 years old, you have those things in your head. It's amazing to see how she turned out these days. She's an advocate. She talks a lot about what the Rwandan government needs to do to move on. And, concentrating more on basically helping the survivors. So she talks about, for example, the old population. The old people in Rwanda who were old at the time, who are getting older now. And guess what? In Africa, the tradition is that you take care of those old people. You have the extended family who actually take care of them when they get old. But these days, those old people don't have anybody. Because guess what? All their families have been killed during the genocide.
Rwanda's ambassador to the U.S. says it's important to find answers to why there was such a hatred in the country. What would you say in closing about this, and what did the people say that you met?
Well, I think most of the people that I talked to mostly talked about, basically the theme, which was Kibuka 20, which was about uniting, remembering, uniting, and renewal. The key word was unity. Most of the people talked about unity. But to the credit of the ambassador, she talked about they owe it to the victims to go back and find out what happened. And I think in order to know where you're going, you need to know where you came from. And I think that's the point that she wanted to talk about. Remembering is hard. It's hard to go back to all these rough moments in history, but it's also good to know what those moments were in order to move on.
Fantastic story. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Mariama Diallo.
Thank you.
We're taking another break. On the other side, a look at the lessons learned or not learned from Rwanda. You're watching On Assignment. The 1994 Rwandan genocide has been called one of the darkest periods in human history, and the United States and other Western powers have been accused of standing by and letting it happen.
So what have we learned since? That is a question U.S. authorities are still debating, as VOA's Kent Klein told On Assignment's Philip Alexio. And we do need to tell you, this segment contains graphic images some may find disturbing.
The world was shocked when an estimated 800,000 Rwandans were massacred in about 100 days, starting April 7, 1994. Members of the ethnic Hutu majority killed about 70% of the minority Tutsis living in Rwanda and many moderate Hutus. U.S. President Bill Clinton was criticized at home and abroad for doing nothing to stop the slaughter.
Ken, when President Clinton 4 years later after the genocide, when he went back in 1998, what was he essentially trying to accomplish? It was a worldwide denial of what was happening, or at least not getting involved to stop it.
It was, and the U.S. had actually gone to great lengths to avoid calling it genocide, because for a number of reasons the U.S. just didn't want to get involved. And President Clinton, when he went there, apologized.
We did not act quickly enough after the killing began. But all over the world, there were people like me sitting in offices day after day after day who did not fully appreciate the depth and the speed with which you were being engulfed by this unimaginable terror.
I think after he left office a few years later, he had said that the Rwanda genocide was the greatest regret of his presidency, and especially that he didn't actively get involved.
And of course, the rest of the world didn't either.
That's true. There was very little action from the UN. There was a UN peacekeeping force, but really not any peace to keep, and it didn't receive a great deal of support.
Now, you mentioned in your report that there is this sort of, if you will, quote, despite the vow of never again, the catastrophe in Rwanda did not bring the end of widespread violence against civilians. So, and yet it continued.
And there remains, to this day, some ethnic tension between the Hutus and Tutsis, but Rwanda has recovered to a great degree, and Kigali is a financial center today and has a very active and very prosperous stock market, and at least, if not in a completely in a human rights sense, at least in a financial sense, in an economic sense, Rwanda has made a tremendous amount of progress over 20 years.
So that certainly seems to be not coincidental that I guess the violence has been, tampered down quite
exactly,
a bit.
Yeah,
right?
that had to happen first. In those 100 days in 1994, 20% of the population was killed, and it was just a mass killing on a level that was rarely seen.
Do you think the United States, at least under this administration, when it comes to this sort of thing, is more reluctant now after the two wars and the war-weary country?
Well, I think so. That's not to say that there is no situation under which the United States would get involved, but Americans are getting tired of military interventions, of sending their boys and young women overseas to fight in situations that they feel perhaps could be avoided by other means.
Veteran U.S. diplomat Johnny Carson, now a senior advisor at the U.S. Institute for Peace, says the Rwanda genocide taught the world it has to move quickly.
Act swiftly and to muster the resources of the international community to condemn and engage as quickly as possible when we see an atrocity about to occur.
Ambassador Carson says the lessons of Rwanda and other massacres led President Barack Obama to establish an Atrocities Prevention Board,
which is an interagency group that gets together once a month under the direction of the National Security Council to review situations around the world that may be likely to turn into atrocities or mass violence.
What has the world learned from this atrocity?
There are limits to what can be done, but I think the consensus is that more is being done, although apparently not enough.
All right, and that was VOA's Kent Klein talking with our very own Philip Alexio. And on the issue of justice for victims of the Rwandan genocide, Human Rights Watch says the record is mixed, and many Rwandans note that since 1995, an international tribunal created to judge these high-level killers has delivered only 49 convictions out of 95 indictments.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Moving on. Justice and the rights of women in India. India's Supreme Court has directed the state of West Bengal to compensate a tribal woman who was gang raped on the orders of a village tribal council. VOA's Aru Pandey and I talked about the case, but first, here's a clip from her report.
Life in this quiet village in the Birbhum district of West Bengal state was shaken in late January after what is said to have taken place in this hut. A 20-year-old member of the Santhal tribe said she was raped by neighbors in the Subalpur village for having a relationship with a man from a different community.
When her fellow villagers learned of this, they had a council meeting, and in that meeting, apparently it was decided that her punishment should be rape because her family could not pay a fine of $400. This is what really got people talking as to how this could happen. And I think about 13 people have been arrested in connection with this. Many of them, she said, were, her neighbors, young teenage boys, or some men who were as old as her father. So I think that's what really was shocking to many. This community was particularly taken aback by this because they're claiming that the people who ordered this punishment, this gang rape, were not part of our community.
Santhal villagers were there as bystanders and had no role in the trial. The political leaders, just to save themselves from trouble, are now putting the whole blame on the Santhals.
Demonstrators have called for India's Central Bureau of Investigation to intervene to determine who exactly was involved in ordering the gang rape of the young tribal woman. She was released from the hospital in February and is not expected to return to her village.
The lady, she's out of the hospital. What's the status on the perpetrators?
The Santhals have had major protests. They're saying, look, we're not involved. Don't try to ban tribal councils. Don't try to ban our culture and our tradition, our practice. So they've asked the Central Bureau of Investigation to investigate who's really behind this attack. One of the men who allegedly took part in the gang rape was someone who's connected to a political party in West Bengal. So they're hoping that the real answers of what has happened or not happened will come out of this. So that's kind of where it is right now.
You spent the last year, the entire year in India covering issues like these. What would you say about issues of sexual assault? I mean, have you seen a rise in these cases, or is it like there's more awareness now?
Well, definitely more awareness. The case that obviously made major headlines around the world was in December 2012, when a young woman who apparently got a ride aboard a private bus with her male friend was brutally gang raped, and she died 2 weeks later in a Singapore hospital of massive internal injuries. And this incident, in the heart of New Delhi, galvanized the Indian population. Thousands of people took to the streets in protest. And the funny thing is, the protests didn't die down. What I saw in my year there, other more high-profile cases of like a 5-year-old being raped by a man or held captive, I would see protests over the weekend. I'd drive around and you'd see protests outside the hospital, outside the police station. There were a number of protests against police saying, look, you're not doing enough to protect women and young girls in this country and in this city. So I think what came out of that huge and tragic event in December of 2012 is a greater awareness. much greater media attention and media coverage. Now, for example, this case, I'm not saying it may not have made headlines, but to the effect that it did in terms of a tribal council allegedly ordering this rape, it made worldwide headlines.
And lastly, is there a place where if a woman is facing issues like that, is there a place where she can go and be helped?
Yeah, there are many groups, and there are many groups that are now even coming up. Even a few years ago, there were like call centers and hotlines that were developed for women to call, and the government has put out a number where, if you see something or experience something, you can call this number. So there are resources, and there are many groups, nonprofit groups, who are also helping women, with any issue that they face like this.
And that was VOA's Aru Pandey. Thank you so much for that. India's Supreme Court has called this tribal court-ordered rape the epitome of aggression against a woman and says it could have been prevented.
And we do want to mention that Aru's report was shot by photographer Aziz Rehman in West Bengal, thanks to Aziz. Now, moving on, Art Enables. That's the name and concept of an art studio here in Washington that helps people with developmental disabilities express and support themselves through art.
VOA's Julie Tabo visited the studio to find out how it all works.
Vanessa Monroe is a visual artist who draws inspiration from the world around her.
Today I'm doing a birdhouse. Birds would love it.
Monroe has a mild intellectual disability, the result of a rare genetic disorder. But that hasn't stopped her from creating intricate, one-of-a-kind pieces that are in high demand at home as well as overseas. Like this watercolor she painted for an international client.
I finished my commission about two married couples. It makes me proud. And it makes me feel good inside.
Being an artist is like part of my dream.
Mara Clausen likes to create images with nature-based themes.
I started drawing watercolors like I was 2 or 3. I just love art.
Clausen also suffers from a hereditary disease that has resulted in a mild learning disability. But she doesn't think about that when she's in the studio with other artists.
It's nice and peaceful, and we can get along with each other.
The two women are regular participants in a program at Art Enables, a nonprofit gallery and studio in Washington. It offers a quiet space to about 30 local artists with a variety of intellectual or developmental disabilities. They come from all backgrounds and ethnicities and range in age from 21 to 78 years old.
Oh, it's really nice.
Mary Linegar is the executive director of Art Enables.
The purpose of our program is to represent and support our artists, and then also to show the different ways that people who are marginalized can communicate through their visual arts.
The gallery provides them with professional materials, their own webpage, and marketing support to help them succeed as professional artists. The artists also receive orders from around the world.
We have had buyers as far away as Germany, Japan, Australia. Last year we sold over $84,000 worth of artwork, and our average piece is around $100.
Vanessa Monroe appreciates the support.
Feel real good because I'm drawing my art and I'm selling it.
And that, says Beth Baldwin, is the goal of Art Enables. Julie Tabo, VOA News, Washington.
You know, that is just such a remarkable story. I was so touched seeing that. It's really heartwarming to see people prospering from something so simple as art.
No doubt about that. It was amazing. We wish we had time for 10 more stories like that, but we are at the end of another show. If you miss us, though, you can check us out on assignment 24/7 at voanews.com.
That's right, and we also have a page on Facebook. You can find us by searching our name on assignment.
And as always, thank you so much for being a part of the show. We'll be back with a whole new episode for you next week.